Kicking and screaming is the name of the game, it appears this hour, for the 19 people indicted in Fulton County, Georgia, for their roles in what has been described as a criminal enterprise there to overturn the results of the 2020 election. For some, more than others. Since we last spoke, Kenneth Cheeseborough, an architect of the fake elector plot, and Ray Smith, an attorney who allegedly made false claims of widespread fraud, went ahead and turned themselves in. They were booked this morning. A few hours after that, attorney Sidney Powell went next, the big lie advocate of Release the Kraken fame. And not even 1 hour ago, we learned Rudy Giuliani surrendered himself as well. Two sources with knowledge of the situation confirm his bond is set for $150,000. The video you're looking at, I should say spectacle you're looking at, is from a few minutes ago, shortly after a defiant Rudy Giuliani was booked. These latest bookings are notable because, as we mentioned, a number of other co-defendants are trying their darndest to evade or at least delay justice being served in what is shaping up to be the first major legal battle in this Georgia case. Former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows is begging a judge to protect him from arrest as he seeks to move the Georgia charges against him to federal court. His argument is that the potential crimes in question were committed, he says, in his capacity as a federal official. Fancy that. Official coup plotter. Late this afternoon, Fulton County District Attorney Vaughn Hillyard submitted her official response to Meadows' request to a judge, writing this, quote, "The defendant has failed to demonstrate that he has suffered irreparable harm, warranting federal intervention in his case, and has cited no authority authorizing this court to prevent his lawful arrest." Former Justice Department official Jeffrey Clark's legal team is making a similar argument to the one Mark Meadows is making. They add this. They want to avoid, quote, "the choice of making rushed travel arrangements to fly to Atlanta or instead risk being labeled a fugitive." Jeffrey Clark, Meet Expedia. In response to that request, DA Willis wrote this, quote, "The defendant seeks to avoid the inconvenience and unpleasantness of being arrested or subject to the mandatory state criminal process, but provides this court no legal basis to justify those ends. Defendant is wrong on the law, wrong on the facts, and the motion should be denied." Meanwhile, Donald Trump, in twisted Trumpian fashion, fancying himself some sort of political martyr, today says this, quote, "He will proudly be arrested in Fulton County tomorrow." So as we sit here today, 8 of the 19 people indicted in Fulton County have been booked, with more on their way. The endeavor to administer justice and accountability in Georgia is just getting started. It's where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Atlanta Journal-Constitution political reporter and MSNBC political contributor Greg Bluestein is back with us. Also joining us, former acting U.S. Solicitor General and MSNBC legal analyst Neil Katyal is here. With me at the table for the hour, former Congressman from Florida, MSNBC political analyst David Jolly is here. And NBC's Vaughn Hillyard is right outside the rooms where it's happening, the Rice Street Jail. Vaughn, we start with you.
Nicolle, did you say Vaughn? I'm sorry.
I did.
It's been a little
I said
Vaughn.
No, listen, it's all part of the vibe, right? We start with you.
We're going to start off your show on a chaotic note here because these sirens have been going off. Rudy Giuliani exited his vehicle, said he was going to talk to reporters one place, instead was surrounded by dozens of cameras and reporters trying to get some questions to him and try to put some coherent thoughts together around his intended defense. Because for Rudy Giuliani, he was essentially propagating the numerous conspiracy theories that we have heard him bring to the forefront over the last 3 years, including several of the voter fraud claims that led to the very criminal charges, or I should say the voter fraud claims that ultimately he tried to use as legitimacy to enact an effort to potentially overturn the election right here outside of the jail after surrendering to authorities on state charges. This for Rudy Giuliani was defiance. I asked him very explicitly whether he had acknowledged making false statements. He said that it was, quote, a total lie. And in large part, Rudy Giuliani complicates his own case because just 1 month ago, in the defamation case from Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman, Rudy Giuliani, in a court filing, said that he would not contest the fact that he had made false statements about voter fraud as it pertained to those two Fulton County election workers. Rudy Giuliani says that he did not admit to lying or making false statements, but by not contesting it, he made a very explicit decision not to challenge it in court. And so for him right here, he is now having to wrap around the reality that he could potentially be looking at years ahead of a trial in which he now has two attorneys, one, his Georgia one, who said he's not necessarily committed to working on his behalf through it all. But he just had to go through the formal booking process like the other defendants, getting his mugshot, getting his fingerprints here in the middle of a 96-degree afternoon in Atlanta, Georgia, Nicolle.
There's something unbelievable about Rudy Giuliani, who wields his experience as someone who, in his own view, was a member of law enforcement in a competent manner, being fingerprinted and booked. Something just particularly rich about it. And just looking at him, he doesn't look like the same figure from his law enforcement years. He looks like Rudy Giuliani of hair dye fame, making a broke pilgrimage to Mar-a-Lago, asking Trump to pay his legal bills. I wonder whether the sort of defiance was cohesive or coherent, or whether it was sort of political in nature.
It is. Could we go with both? I am not one to judge.
Cohesive political defiance. That's a thing, yes.
Sorry, I did not mean cohesive. I mean incohesive, and I want to be careful in the way in which I talk about the former mayor. And I mean that, Nicolle, that I realize that there is a lot of pressure, I'm sure, that is on somebody who has been criminally charged. But the mayor has struggled to formulate a coherent defense for himself. And that is why late into last night, there were still questions about who his own counsel was. We were able to catch his attorneys leaving the district attorney's office. And again, I go back to his Georgia counsel here, and I very directly asked him whether he intends to stick with Giuliani through the entirety of this ordeal. And he said he was not yet ready to make that commitment. This is a complicated case. He has one essentially political advisor. They're running a nightly podcast that lasts like an hour and a half every night, in which Rudy Giuliani, either from New York or Florida, sort of rambles about either his own political being or Joe Biden's political being. And it's very tough to try to convey to you and the audience what Rudy Giuliani's path is, what his defense is, other than one of defiance, and that he is going to stand by Donald Trump through and through because he believes, or at least makes the case, that he was in the right in the aftermath of the 2020 election, despite these allegations levied by Fani Willis that he knowingly made false statements and then acted on them.
I mean, I think you may have sort of pioneered a profound new way to talk about Trump's surrogates. This sort of incoherent defiance is what they are and do. And I know exactly what you're talking about, right? Like confident in whatever he thinks his position is, but totally incoherent about why. I feel like I glossed over something really important and factual and legal in nature, and that is that what you were putting to him is really important in the context of the crimes he was booked for today. And that is this separate case, a defamation case brought by the two election workers, Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, where his current position in that case is essentially that these things were false, so that he's trying to not end up where Fox did with Dominion, sort of sustaining the known falsity piece, which cost almost $1 billion to Fox News. I think even Rudy would concede he doesn't have $1 billion to spare. Tell me how that will work against him in defending himself from these specific charges, where that is one of the counts that has been levied against him.
Right. The exact line here from the filing was, quote, the defendant, Giuliani, for the purposes of this litigation only, so to Rudy Giuliani's defense, the district attorney would have difficulty using his decision to not contest the past statements. But I just want to read this again. The defendant, Giuliani, for the purposes of this litigation only, does not contest that, to the extent the statements were statements of fact and otherwise actionable, such actionable factual statements were false. That was the statement as it pertained to that specific case. And Rudy Giuliani was very clear to make sure that this did not allow him to challenge the constitutionality of the statements that he made in 2020. And so I think there are some distinctions I'll let our legal folks get into but Rudy Giuliani is making the case that he was constitutionally able to make these false statements, and in this specific defamation case is not going to try to fight it in the court of law that they were false statements, but he is defiant that he did not admit to making false statements. I leave you with that there, Nicolle.